Dr. Evelyn Carter stood in front of the large screen in the research facility, her eyes glued to the flashing data. Her heart pounded in her chest as she studied the strange signal that had appeared out of nowhere. For weeks, the scientists at the research station had been picking up anomalies in space, but this was different. This wasn't just a random burst of energy. It was intelligent. The signal was faint, barely detectable, but it was there. It wasn't from any known source, not from any star or planet. It was coming from a distant corner of the galaxy, a place where no one had dared to look in years. Evelyn's mind raced. What could it be? Could it be the remains of a long-lost alien civilization, or something entirely new? Evelyn had worked with alien signals before, but this was unlike anything she had encountered. She was familiar with radio waves, cosmic radiation, and the occasional flare from distant stars. But this was too structured. The patterns in the signal were deliberate, too precise to be random. There was meaning behind it. Someone, or something, was sending it. She quickly called her team into the lab. The group of scientists had been working together for years, but none of them had seen anything like this. They gathered around the screens, each of them wearing a look of confusion and curiosity. "What do you think it is, Evelyn?" asked Professor Graham, the senior scientist. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of excitement in his eyes. "I don't know," Evelyn replied, her voice tight with uncertainty. "But whatever it is, it's unlike anything we've ever seen. I've never seen a signal this structured before. It's like they're trying to communicate." Her fingers flew across the console, typing in commands to analyze the signal further. She ran it through every decryption algorithm she had at her disposal, trying to make sense of the patterns. They had to be important. Whoever, whatever, had sent this message wanted it to be found. But then came the unexpected. The signal was suddenly interrupted, and the data they were receiving from the satellite went silent. The screen flickered and went black. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. "What just happened?" asked Dr. Maria Liu, a younger scientist who had been working under Evelyn's supervision. "The signal just vanished." Evelyn quickly checked the systems. "It's not gone. It's still there. The signal is still sending, but it's somehow being blocked." She turned to the team. "We need to find out where this is coming from, and fast. If it's what I think it is, this could change everything we know about the universe." The team worked around the clock, trying to figure out what had caused the interruption. They were able to track the signal's origin to a distant region of space, an area called the Dead Zone, a place that had been long avoided by explorers due to the lack of any viable stars or planets. For years, it had been considered a void, a place with nothing of interest. No one had ever dared to look deeper. Evelyn, however, felt a strange pull to it. She knew that the signal was coming from there, and she knew that it was too important to ignore. If this was truly the sign of an alien civilization, there was no time to waste. "Professor, we have to go," Evelyn said, her voice firm with determination. "We have to find out what's out there." Professor Graham hesitated. "The Dead Zone. No one has gone there in decades. We have no idea what we're dealing with." "I know," Evelyn replied, her eyes narrowing. "But we can't just sit here and wait. Whoever is out there, they're reaching out, and we need to answer." The professor nodded slowly. "All right, I'll make the arrangements, but I want to make one thing clear. We don't know what we're walking into." "I understand," Evelyn said, her mind already working out the details. "But whatever it is, we need to find it." The team began to prepare for the mission, packing up equipment and making the necessary arrangements for the journey. They would be traveling to the edge of known space, into the Dead Zone, a place where the stars were dim and the darkness seemed endless. The journey would be long, and it would be dangerous, but for Evelyn, it was the only option. As they set their course and prepared for launch, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something extraordinary. The signal was only the beginning. There was so much more out there, hidden in the vastness of space, And whatever they found in the dead zone, it was clear that humanity had stumbled upon something that no one had ever expected. A lost civilization, a message from the past, and perhaps even a new future. The engines of the ship roared to life, and the research station slowly receded from view. The crew of scientists looked out the windows as they left behind the familiar comforts of home, venturing into the unknown. Evelyn stood at the front of the ship, her eyes fixed on the vast expanse of space ahead. The dead zone loomed in the distance, dark and mysterious. But Evelyn knew one thing for sure. Humanity could no longer ignore what lay beyond the stars. There was a message waiting to be discovered, and it was their job to find it. As they entered the deep void of the dead zone, Evelyn's mind raced with possibilities. What could be out there? And what would they find when they finally reached the source of that mysterious signal? The journey into the unknown had only just begun. A hum of the ship's engines echoed in the silent cabin as the crew prepared for the long journey ahead. The stars outside the windows twinkled in the distance, but they felt far away, as if the universe itself had swallowed them up. The dead zone, a vast and unexplored region of space, was a place where the stars barely flickered. There was nothing to guide them except the faint, mysterious signal that Evelyn's team had traced to this empty part of the galaxy. Dr. Evelyn Carter stood at the front of the ship, staring out into the void. Her mind was racing. The signal had been calling them, urging them to venture deeper into the unknown. But now, as they left behind the safety of the research station and headed toward the depths of space, doubt crept in. What if they were making a mistake? What if the signal was a trap, a lure set by something far beyond their understanding? "Everything's going according to plan," said Professor Graham, approaching her side. His voice was calm, but Evelyn could sense the same nervous energy in him. He, too, had questions. They all did. "I hope so," Evelyn replied quietly, trying to shake off the nagging feeling in her chest. But what if this was meant to lead us to something we shouldn't find? Graham paused, looking out into the dark expanse of space. "It's possible, but there's one thing we do know. The signal was deliberately sent. Someone, something, wants us to find it." Evelyn nodded, though she wasn't entirely convinced. She wanted to believe in their mission, to think that the discovery would be a breakthrough for humanity, but a part of her couldn't ignore the warnings. The dead zone wasn't just empty space. It was a place that had been untouched for centuries. As the ship continued its journey, the crew settled into their routine, but the atmosphere aboard the vessel was tense. The data from the signal had shown only glimpses of what lay ahead. There were no clear answers, just fragments of alien language and patterns. They were trying to decode the message as they traveled, but it was slow going. Evelyn and the rest of the team worked long hours, sifting through the data, hoping for a breakthrough, but it always seemed just out of reach. The days blended together. Time was different in space. With no day or night to mark the passage of time, it felt like they were moving through a dream, one that kept shifting and changing. The silence of the dead zone outside their ship only deepened the sense of isolation. It was as if the universe had forgotten about this place. Then, on the fourth day of their journey, something unexpected happened. The ship's systems flickered. The lights dimmed. Evelyn was jolted out of her thoughts, staring at the suddenly erratic screens in front of her. The hum of the ship's engines had changed. It was no longer steady and constant. Now, it was sporadic, like a heartbeat struggling to keep going. "What's happening?" asked Dr. Liu, her voice filled with alarm. She was sitting at one of the control panels, frantically typing to stabilize the ship's systems. "I don't know," Evelyn said, moving to her side. "It's like the ship's core is malfunctioning. Can you run a diagnostic?" Liu worked quickly, but before she could respond, the ship jolted again. This time, it was stronger. The force of it threw Evelyn off her feet, and she grabbed onto the nearest seat to steady herself. "Brace yourselves," Evelyn shouted, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. The crew scrambled to secure themselves as the ship shook violently. Outside the ship's windows, a strange light appeared. It wasn't like the soft glow of distant stars or the harsh flicker of a comet. This light was different, intense, almost alive. It pulsed and flickered as if it were trying to communicate, beckoning them closer. "That light, is that where the signal is coming from?" Graham asked, his eyes wide with disbelief. Evelyn didn't answer at first. She was too focused on the light outside the ship. It was coming from a massive object, an enormous hidden structure, far larger than anything they had anticipated. The light was coming from its core. It's not a planet," Evelyn murmured. "It's a ship from an alien civilization. And it's alive." Lou's voice came through the comms, shaky but clear. "Evelyn, we've been pulled into its gravitational field. We can't break free. We're being drawn in." The realization hit Evelyn like a wave crashing over her. They hadn't just found a signal. They had found a massive alien ship, one that was still functioning, still capable of pulling them in. "We need to get control of the ship now," Evelyn ordered. "All hands on deck. We're not going to make it if we don't get out of this field." The crew scrambled to regain control, but it was clear they were powerless against the immense force of the alien ship's pull. The strange lights intensified, and suddenly, the ship was being dragged in faster. It was too late to turn back now. They were headed straight for it. "Evelyn, we're entering the ship's atmosphere," Professor Graham said, his voice tense. "There's no way to avoid it. We're going down." The ship plunged toward the dark surface of the massive alien vessel, its engines screeching in protest as the gravitational pull took hold. The crew held their breath, their bodies pressed into their seats, hearts pounding. "Hold on," Evelyn shouted, gripping the control panel. "This is it. We're going to make history." But as they neared the surface, something unexpected happened. The ship's systems shut down entirely. The lights flickered, the engines went silent, and for a brief moment, it felt as though they were suspended in space. And then, in the darkness, the ship landed with a thud, the ground beneath them shuddering. The crew was thrown forward, but somehow they remained alive. The silence was deafening. The ship had landed on the surface of an ancient, forgotten world, and the alien ship, this massive, mysterious object, was waiting for them. But what was inside? What would they find? The ship's systems slowly powered down, but the ominous hum of the alien craft reverberated through the hull. The crew sat in tense silence, waiting for some sort of signal, some indication that they were safe. But the silence that followed the landing only deepened their unease. Dr. Evelyn Carter's fingers hovered over the control panel, but there was no response from the ship's external systems. She had to admit it. This was no ordinary alien technology. The structure they had just landed on was ancient, impossibly advanced, and yet it felt dormant, as though it had been waiting for centuries. "Do you think it's safe?" Professor Graham asked, his voice low but filled with concern. Evelyn hesitated, her gaze fixed on the darkened view outside. The alien structure loomed, dark and enigmatic against the light of distant stars. "We don't know yet, but we can't stay here. We need to investigate." Maria Liu, one of the younger scientists, was already pulling on her helmet, her movements frantic. "I think we're too late," she muttered. "This place feels wrong. I don't like it." Evelyn placed a hand on Maria's shoulder, trying to calm her. "We have no choice. We're here, and we need answers. We're going inside." The crew suited up quickly and gathered their gear, checking the systems one last time before stepping into the unknown. The exit hatch opened with a low hiss, and the crew stepped out onto the alien surface. The gravity here was slightly lighter than on Earth, which made their steps feel oddly buoyant, but the air was thick with an unfamiliar metallic taste. It wasn't breathable, and their helmets sealed tight with a soft click. What lay before them was like nothing they had ever seen. The surface was covered with a strange, organic material, smooth, dark, and seemingly alive. It shimmered under the weak light, almost as if the ground itself was watching them. In the distance, towering spires rose up from the landscape, their shapes almost alive, twisting and curving in unnatural ways. "Where are we?" Maria whispered, her voice trembling in awe and fear. "We're on a ship, but it's not a ship like we know," Evelyn answered, her voice steady but full of wonder. The scale of what they had discovered was beyond comprehension. "This is something else, something old, something powerful." As they moved farther from the ship, the silence seemed to grow heavier. Every step felt like it echoed through the vast emptiness, amplifying their isolation. The ground was soft, almost sponge-like, but strangely resistant underfoot. It gave the eerie feeling that the whole planet, or whatever this place was breathing with them. "We need to find the source of the signal," Evelyn urged. The data we got from the ship indicated a central location. "It's coming from somewhere deep inside." The team set off, making their way toward a large structure in the distance. The path was long, but as they walked, they noticed strange, glowing symbols etched into the ground, as if they were being guided. They had no idea what they meant, but something told Evelyn they weren't random. It was as if the ship itself was alive and wanted them to follow. "Look at these markings," said Dr. Liu, crouching down beside one of the symbols. "They're not just designs. This is writing. It looks almost like a warning." Evelyn stepped forward, examining the symbols closely. There was something unsettling about them. It's possible this civilization could have been trying to warn others, or maybe they were warning themselves. The farther they traveled, the more it became clear that this alien place wasn't merely abandoned. It felt watched. There was an unnatural stillness, but it wasn't empty. Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was waiting. The crew had entered into something they didn't fully understand, and there was no turning back now. As they reached the central structure, they were met with an imposing doorway. The walls around it seemed to breathe, and the entrance itself was marked with symbols that glowed faintly. It was as if the doorway recognized them, and it opened slowly as if inviting them in. With a deep breath, Evelyn stepped forward, motioning for the others to follow. "Let's go." The interior of the building was far grander than they could have imagined. The walls were covered in intricate alien technology, the likes of which humanity had never seen. It hummed with energy, and the air was thick with the weight of forgotten knowledge. This place had been untouched for centuries, perhaps longer, and yet it still functioned as if waiting for someone to unlock its secrets. As they moved deeper into the heart of the structure, a sense of dread began to settle over the crew. The air was colder here, and the walls seemed to grow tighter with every step. Evelyn noticed a faint glow ahead, like the pulsating heart of the alien ship, and felt a strange pull toward it. When they reached the source of the light, they found themselves standing in a vast chamber. In the center, suspended in midair, was a massive object, encased in an intricate lattice of energy. It was a crystal, but it wasn't like anything they had ever seen. It glowed with a soft, blue light, and the moment Evelyn laid eyes on it, she felt an overwhelming sense of connection, as though it was calling to her. "This is it," she whispered, reaching out toward the crystal. "This is the source of the signal." Just as her hand neared the object, a loud hum filled the air, vibrating through the walls. The crystal began to shift, its light flickering. The team jumped back in alarm, but it was too late. The chamber shook, and a voice, deep, resonating, and ancient, echoed through the space. "You should not have come." The words reverberated through their minds, not just heard, but felt. It was a warning from the civilization that had once called this place home, a warning that had been waiting for them. Evelyn froze, her heart racing. What had they awakened? And more importantly, were they too late? The chamber shook violently as the echo of the mysterious voice filled their minds. The energy in the room crackled, and the once still air became thick with a tense electricity. Evelyn's heart raced as she stepped back, her hand still hovering near the alien crystal. The voice had been inside her head. No, inside all their heads. It wasn't just spoken, it was felt, deep within their consciousness. You should not have come. The words were so clear, so real, yet they came from nowhere. The source of the voice was hidden in the shadows, leaving no trace of its origin. The crystal in the center of the room flickered in response, its glow pulsating faster with each passing second. The team stood frozen, their breath caught in their throats. They had crossed a line that had been drawn centuries ago by a civilization that had long since vanished. And now, they were facing the consequences. What was that? Maria whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know, Evelyn said, her voice barely a whisper as she took another cautious step backward. But I think we've disturbed something ancient, something powerful. Professor Graham, usually calm and collected, was visibly shaken. This isn't just a message, it's a warning. Whoever, or whatever, was here, they didn't want anyone to find this place. The hum in the room grew louder, and the crystal's light became blinding. It was as if the object itself was alive, reacting to their presence, to their very thoughts. It was pulling them in, drawing them closer, but Evelyn knew better than to approach it again. They had already made that mistake. Stay back, Evelyn shouted, her voice carrying through the chamber. We need to leave. Now. But it was too late. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the walls began to shift. The once stable, quiet structure now groaned in protest, as though something deep within was waking up, something that had been dormant for millennia. Suddenly, a deep rumble echoed from the depths of the ship. The lights flickered, and the strange symbols on the walls seemed to come alive, glowing brighter as if activated by the team's presence. The very air around them hummed with power, and Evelyn felt a cold sweat bead on her brow. The ship wasn't just a vessel. It was a living, breathing entity. And it wasn't happy that they had entered. We need to get out of here. Now, Evelyn said, her voice filled with urgency. We've awakened something we don't understand. But just as they turned to head back toward the entrance, the doors that had led them inside slammed shut with a deafening bang. The rumbling of the ship intensified, and the crystal in the center of the room pulsed in time with the vibrations. A low, grinding sound filled the space as something massive began to move from within the ship's depths. What's happening? Maria gasped, her eyes wide with panic. Before Evelyn could respond, the walls began to shift once more. Sections of the ceiling groaned and split apart, revealing a strange, organic structure inside the walls, something that seemed to pulse and writhe like flesh. It was as though the ship itself had been designed to grow, to adapt, to change. What is that? Dr. Liu shouted, pointing to the shifting walls, which now appeared to be alive. Tendrils of strange material reached out, extending from the walls and stretching toward the crew. This ship isn't just ancient, Evelyn said, a chill running down her spine. It's alive, and we've woken it. The air was thick with tension, and it felt as though they were standing at the heart of something vast and ancient. Every instinct in Evelyn's body screamed at her to run, to get away from the growing terror that surrounded them. But there was nowhere to go. The doors were sealed, and the room was closing in on them. The ground trembled again, this time much harder. The walls cracked open, revealing the hidden passage. Without thinking, Evelyn grabbed Maria's hand and pulled her toward the opening. Come on, she shouted to the others. This way. They sprinted down the passage, the walls seeming to close in behind them. The pulse of energy from the crystal still hummed through the entire ship, and the walls around them seemed to be shifting to trap them inside. But the passage they had entered seemed to lead deeper into the ship, and Evelyn had a feeling, an unsettling feeling, that they were heading toward its core. The deeper they went, the more the ship began to feel like a maze, its walls shifting and transforming around them. There was no telling where they were going, or what lay ahead. The pulse of the ship grew louder with each step, as though the ship itself was growing stronger, feeding off their fear. Finally, they reached a massive chamber, the walls lined with strange, glowing symbols. At the center of the room was a large, organic-looking structure, similar to the crystal they had seen before, but far larger and more complex. This was the heart of the ship, the source of the power, the source of the signal. And now, as they stood there, gazing at the enormous structure, Evelyn realized something. The ship wasn't just alive, it was aware. It was watching them, waiting for them to make their next move. The voice from earlier echoed once more, louder this time, almost as if it were speaking directly into their minds. "You have awakened the vessel. The price will be paid." Evelyn's blood ran cold as the words settled in. There was no going back now. They had disturbed something ancient, and it had already begun to stir. But as the words faded, another feeling grew stronger. A feeling of intense power, something dark and unyielding that seemed to pulse through the air itself. The ship wasn't just waking up, it was preparing for something. And they were about to become part of it. The team stood frozen, their minds racing with the realization that they were in far deeper than they could have ever imagined. Whatever had been dormant in the depths of this ship had now been awakened, and they were the ones who had caused it. The question now was, what would the ship do next? The air in the chamber had thickened, buzzing with an otherworldly energy that seemed to warp the very fabric of reality around them. Evelyn's heart pounded as the hum from the massive structure at the center of the room grew louder, vibrating through her bones. The walls of the chamber seemed to ripple, the glowing symbols now forming a continuous pattern, pulsing in time with the heart of the ship. "We've made a grave mistake," Evelyn whispered, barely able to hear her own voice over the growing hum. The entire ship felt alive now, like an organism, stirring after a long slumber. Maria's face was pale, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. "What does it want from us?" Before Evelyn could answer, the voice, the one that had spoken inside their heads earlier, rumbled once more, shaking the very air around them. "The price will be paid." It was as if the ship itself was speaking to them, its thoughts piercing through their minds like daggers. Evelyn felt a cold wave of dread wash over her. They had awakened something ancient and unforgiving, and now it wanted something from them. But what? The glowing symbols on the walls brightened, their light growing intense enough to make it difficult to see. And then, with a low groan, the floor beneath them shifted. A large section of the wall opposite them began to retract, revealing another passage that stretched deep into the heart of the ship. The passage was darker than anything they had seen before, and Evelyn could feel the weight of the ship pressing in on them, as if it were aware of every step they took. "We need to move," Evelyn ordered, her voice firm despite the fear gnawing at her. "There's no time to waste. Whatever's coming for us, we can't stay here." The team hesitated for only a moment before following Evelyn. The walls around them shifted again, the ship reacting to their every movement. The passage ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, a dark, winding tunnel that threatened to swallow them whole. As they moved deeper into the ship, the atmosphere changed. The air grew colder, heavier, and the ship seemed to close in on them from all sides. The walls were now covered in a strange, fleshy material, as though the ship was no longer just mechanical, but part organic in nature. Every step they took felt like they were crossing a threshold they couldn't come back from. "What happened to this place?" Dr. Liu murmured, her voice shaking as she looked around in disbelief. "It's like the ship is alive, like it's feeding off us." Evelyn nodded grimly. "It's more than just alive. This is a weapon, and we're in the heart of it." The team continued down the passage, the dark path stretching before them like a vast unknown. The walls seemed to move with them, reacting to their every step, the temperature dropping with every foot they advanced. At times, it felt as though they were walking through the intestines of some monstrous creature, the organic material around them pulsing and twitching like it was trying to digest them. Then they reached the end of the passage. A massive chamber opened before them, far larger than any room they had entered before. It was a vast, cathedral-like space, and in the center stood a massive, glowing core. The core was a pulsating mass of energy, its light blinding and overwhelming. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "This is it," Evelyn breathed. "This is the source of the power, the signal, everything." The crew stood frozen, staring at the heart of the ship. The energy in the room was suffocating, as if the very air was charged with it. Evelyn could feel it in her bones. It was both a promise and a warning, something ancient and beyond human comprehension. But as they stepped closer, the voice echoed through their minds once more. "You should have left. You are too late." The words were sharp, like a knife scraping against bone. The ship had spoken again, and this time there was no mistaking the threat in its tone. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled, and the energy from the core surged violently. The walls of the chamber began to crack, the organic material of the ship shifting and contorting like it was alive, reacting to the team's presence. It was as if the ship had decided that they were the threat, and now it was preparing to strike. The air was thick with static, the ground shaking beneath them. Evelyn grabbed Maria's arm as the room seemed to twist and warp around them. A low, guttural sound filled the air, and the light from the core intensified, nearly blinding them. "We have to get out of here," Evelyn shouted, her voice drowned out by the deafening hum of the ship. But before they could turn to leave, the walls closed in behind them, sealing the exit. The ship wasn't letting them go. They were trapped, and the core was pulsing with an energy that felt like it was about to tear the very fabric of reality apart. "We're not going to make it," Dr. Liu gasped, her face pale as she backed away from the glowing core. The walls were closing in faster now, the ship's insides becoming a living, breathing nightmare. "We're going to have to fight," Evelyn said, her voice firm as she pulled her team together. There was no way out now. They had unleashed something terrible, and the ship would not let them leave until it had claimed its price. Evelyn turned to the others, determination setting in her gaze. "We've come too far. We can't just let it destroy us." The crew's eyes met hers, each of them understanding the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a battle against an ancient force, something far beyond human comprehension. The ship was alive, and it wanted them. The chamber seemed to close in on them, the walls constricting with every second, as if the ship itself was becoming more and more hostile. Evelyn's mind raced. They were trapped in the heart of an alien vessel, one that was alive, aware, and angry. There was no way out. The pulsating light from the core illuminated the room with an eerie, almost hypnotic glow, casting long shadows across the team. They were surrounded on all sides, the very air itself pressing down on them like a vice. "We need to get to the control center," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "That's where the ship's heart is, the source of all this power. If we can figure out how to stop it, we might have a chance." The walls around them groaned as the ship continued to react to their presence, the strange organic material shifting and expanding. Every movement they made seemed to provoke the ship further. The floor shook again, and the rumble of something massive moving within the ship echoed through the chamber. "This is insane," Dr. Liu muttered, her eyes wide with fear. "We can't just waltz into the control center. There has to be a way to shut this thing down from the outside. There has to be some kind of weapon." Evelyn shook her head, her gaze fixed on the glowing core. "I don't think it's that simple. The ship is alive. It's not just a machine we can shut down. It's a living organism, and we've just disturbed it." Maria stepped forward, her face grim. "Then we have no choice but to fight back. If it's not going to let us leave, we'll make it." The group shared a silent moment of agreement. They were no longer explorers in an ancient alien world. They were survivors, fighting against something far beyond their understanding. The walls of the chamber started to ripple again, and suddenly, a series of glowing tendrils shot out from the ceiling, extending toward them with blinding speed. They were like living vines, the pulsating glow of the ship radiating from them, seeking to ensnare the team. "Watch out!" Evelyn shouted, diving to the side as a tendril swiped at her, missing by inches. She rolled to her feet, narrowly avoiding another strike. The team scattered, ducking and dodging the writhing tendrils that now filled the chamber. The ship's movements were fast, fluid, and unpredictable, like a deadly dance. The tendrils were everywhere, lashing out with terrifying speed, striking at the walls, the floor, and even the air. "We need to fight back," Maria yelled, pulling out a small energy weapon from her pack. She fired at one of the tendrils, the blast making a loud crack as it struck. But the tendril only recoiled slightly before it quickly reformed, seemingly unaffected. "This isn't going to work," Evelyn said, watching in horror as the tendrils retracted into the walls and floor. "We need something bigger, something that can hurt it, not just slow it down." Professor Graham was scanning the room, looking for anything that could help. He pointed toward the far end of the chamber, where a large panel seemed to be embedded in the wall, its surface covered in strange, alien symbols. "That panel, if we can reach it, maybe we can access the ship's systems. There might be something there that can stop this," Graham said. Evelyn nodded. "We don't have time. We need to move. Now." Without another word, the team sprinted toward the panel, ducking and weaving through the tendrils that continued to lash out at them. The ship seemed to be focusing on them now, its movements becoming more aggressive with every step they took. The walls groaned as though in pain, and the hum of the ship grew louder, more intense. They reached the panel, but as Evelyn approached, she noticed something strange. The symbols on the panel began to shift, rearranging themselves into something that seemed familiar. "It's trying to communicate," Evelyn murmured, her hand hovering over the panel surface. The symbols seemed to pulse in time with the ship's heartbeat, each flash more urgent than the last. "Evelyn, don't touch it," Dr. Liu shouted, her voice filled with panic. But it was too late. The moment Evelyn made contact with the panel, a surge of energy shot through her body, sending a shockwave of power racing through her veins. Her body spasmed as the alien energy coursed through her, and for a moment, she thought she might lose control. The room around her blurred, the ship's voice filling her mind once more. "You are too late. The awakening is complete." The words echoed like thunder in her head, rattling her thoughts. But something else, something deeper, pulsed within the voice. A realization. The ship wasn't just threatening them. It was asking them to understand. The symbols on the panel shifted again, and Evelyn felt an overwhelming surge of understanding flood her mind. She could see it all. The plan. The ship was a living weapon, its purpose tied to the survival of its creators. But the civilization that had built it was gone, wiped out by their own greed, their own hunger for power. And now, the ship, awakened and desperate, was trying to survive. "We have to stop it," Evelyn said, gasping for breath. "This ship is a weapon, but it's not the enemy. It's been abandoned. It doesn't know what it's doing." Maria stepped forward, her voice firm. "Then we need to help it. We need to shut it down before it destroys us all." Evelyn's mind was reeling from the flood of information, but there was no time to waste. She knew what had to be done, and there was no turning back. The ship needed to be stopped, not just for their survival, but for the survival of everyone back on Earth. The ground rumbled again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't the ship attacking, it was something else. A tremor of energy, a final warning. The ship was preparing for its last stand. "There's no time," Evelyn said. "Let's end this." The chamber trembled violently as the energy within the ship surged, vibrating through the air like a storm. Evelyn's heart raced as she tried to steady her breathing, her mind still reeling from the revelation. The ship was not their enemy. It was a dying entity, one that had been abandoned by its creators, and now, in its desperation, it was going to destroy everything in its path, including them. But what if they could stop it? What if they could help it find peace? We need to act now, Evelyn shouted, snapping the team out of their trance-like state. We can't let this ship tear itself apart. If we don't stop it, it will destroy everything. Maria, still gripping her weapon tightly, glanced at the pulsing core. How do we stop it? The ship's not just going to let us turn it off. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. There's a way. The core is connected to the ship's systems. If we can redirect its power, we can prevent it from continuing its rampage. But it won't be easy. It will fight us every step of the way. The team quickly moved into action. Dr. Liu, the ship's expert, approached the control panel, her hands shaking as she typed in a series of commands on the alien interface. Evelyn could see the weight of the decision pressing down on her friend's shoulders. Dr. Liu had seen the ship's power firsthand, and now she was trying to make sense of it, hoping against hope that they could find a way to contain it. We need to reroute the energy flow, Dr. Liu said, her voice tense. But it's not just a matter of flipping switches. This technology is so advanced, it's like nothing we've ever seen. I don't even know if it's possible. Evelyn looked up at the massive, glowing core in the center of the room. The energy flowing from it was so powerful, so intense, it almost felt like it could tear the ship apart. We don't have time to question it. We need to stop this thing before it reaches critical mass. As the team worked frantically to reroute the energy, the walls of the chamber groaned again, and the ship's hum became deafening. The tendrils that had once lashed out at them began to retreat, but the very air felt charged, as though the ship itself was bracing for an explosion. It's too much, Dr. Liu whispered, her fingers flying over the controls. I can't hold it much longer. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, and she moved toward the glowing core. The ship seemed to be watching her, its energy growing ever more unstable. She could feel it, deep within her. The core was reacting to her presence, as though it recognized something in her. She had seen it before. The same pulse, the same hum, when she had first touched the panel earlier. The ship was trying to communicate again, and Evelyn realized something vital. This wasn't just a machine. It had a consciousness, it had a purpose, and in a twisted, alien way, it was asking for help. Suddenly, the ship's voice filled her mind again. This time, it wasn't threatening. It was pleading. Help, help, please, save us. Evelyn's chest tightened. There was no turning back now. They had to help it. We can't stop it like this, Evelyn said, turning toward the others. We have to sync with it. We have to give it a chance to release its energy in a controlled way. We can't let it explode. The team froze, understanding the gravity of her words. To sync with the ship meant to connect with its consciousness, to tie themselves to its fate. It was dangerous, even life-threatening. But it was the only chance they had to prevent a catastrophe. I'll do it, Evelyn said, her voice resolute. She couldn't afford to hesitate. The ship had given her its trust, and now she would return it. Maria reached out to her. Are you sure about this? Evelyn met her eyes. It's the only way. With a deep breath, Evelyn stepped toward the core, ignoring the burning sensation in her veins as she approached the center of the ship's energy. The moment her hands touched the core, the energy surged through her like a bolt of lightning. It was overwhelming, a tidal wave of raw power flooding her senses. Her body spasmed, her vision flashing with lights and symbols too fast for her to process. The ship was alive. It was awakening, not just as a weapon, but as a consciousness. Evelyn's mind raced as she tried to understand the ship's pain, its hunger, and its desperation. The voice spoke to her again, clearer now. I am the last. My creators, gone. Please, stop the destruction. I cannot control this, alone. The ship was not malevolent. It was broken, a creation without purpose after the fall of its creators. It didn't want to destroy. It was simply trying to survive. Evelyn pushed through the overwhelming surge of energy, connecting herself fully to the ship. She understood its thoughts, its fears. She could feel the weight of its pain. And then she did the unthinkable. Using all of her willpower, She redirected the flow of energy within the ship. She focused every part of herself on the task, sensing with the ship's core, guiding it to release the stored energy in a safe, controlled manner. The core's pulse slowed, the violent tremors lessened, and the ship seemed to calm. For a moment, everything was still. And then the voice spoke again, softer this time. "Thank you." Evelyn collapsed to the ground, exhausted. The ship's energy had been rerouted, and the imminent destruction was avoided. But it had come at a cost. Evelyn could feel the last of her strength draining from her body. The teen rushed to her side, lifting her up. Maria held her tightly, her voice filled with relief. "You did it, Evelyn. You saved us." Evelyn nodded weakly, her eyes drifting toward the now quiet core. "We saved it, and ourselves." As the team stood there, surrounded by the silent, now dormant ship, they realized the true meaning of their mission. They hadn't just uncovered a lost alien civilization. They had connected with it, saved it from its own destructive fate. They had given it a chance to survive, just as they had survived. But they also knew this wasn't the end. The ship would eventually need a new purpose, a new beginning, and they would be there to help guide it, just as they had done today. The ship wasn't their enemy anymore, it was their ally. And as they left the alien vessel behind, they knew they had made history. They had not only survived the ship's wrath, but they had also bridged the gap between humanity and an ancient, forgotten civilization, one that would never be abandoned again.